Welcome to the lecture on relationship dissolution. In this class, in interpersonal communication, we've started with first framework, then conversation, then we talked about the development of relationships and the maintenance of relationships, and now we're talking about how they end. So we're doing the whole life cycle of relating. Now, in this lecture, we're going to talk about sources of relationship dissolution. We're going to give you a model of how this works, and different ways people end relationships. So if you've ever ended a friendship or if you've ended a romantic relationship, you can also dissolve family relationships. Maybe some of you have basically become estranged from your family or broke up with your family and told, I'm not seeing you all anymore. And of course, you can also end institutional relationships, although you may not do it formally or informally through a breakup. You might just not renew the contract or whatever. So either way, the 4 types of relationships all apply here. So let's get to it. There are a couple common causes of relational decline. So when we're talking about relational decline, we're talking about a decrease in relationship satisfaction or happiness. Of course, number 1 would be deterioration in communication itself. So what can happen here is that there's a reduction in the quality or the amount, or there's just increased negativity in your daily interactions. So communicating itself becomes problematic. So deterioration in communication is a big one. So how you talk to each other, how often you talk to each other, if all of that just starts to go south, that's often a source of relationship decline. Next, you have destructive conflict. So your conflicts tend to get out of control and they become destructive according to Gottman standards. So if you watch the John Gottman lecture and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, or in this case, the 4 horsemen of divorce, you'll see that some conflict actually becomes destructive, and that's what predicts divorce in a lot of couples. Thirdly, you might have a change in standards, and what this means is that the relationship just no longer seems good or satisfying as it once did due to changes in your standards of how you measure relationships. Perhaps your personal needs have changed. Maybe you've been with the same person for 5 years, and just your life, you're at a different stage now. You have a full-time job, you really love your career, and you want somebody who's career-driven, and maybe the partner who you started, dating 5 years ago wasn't into those things and still isn't. So you had a change in standards. So this is where things like your comparison level of alternatives start to come into play. So there's where your social exchange theory really starts to become relevant. Fourthly, you can have transgressions. So a transgression is basically an act or a hurtful event that you feel offended or hurt by. So whenever somebody commits a transgression, they did something that was hurtful to you. So that's all a transgression is. It's a hurtful event that occurred. So depending on the nature of the transgression, a transgression could be somebody cheated on you, or somebody said something really hurtful to you. A best friend told one of your secrets and it caused a lot of boundary turbulence and invasions of privacy, and you just can't get over it because you can't believe your best friend didn't keep this secret. Okay, so that's a transgression. Now, transgressions happen naturally in a relationship, so it's not like if you commit one, you're out necessarily. It just depends on what the nature of it is and how well you can deal with it. And can you forgive your partner? Can you talk about it? All of those things. Or if there's just straight up inequity, if you don't feel like you're being treated fairly, if according to equity theory, the ratio is imbalanced. Remember, one of the options in social exchange theory is to end the relationship, if not seek rewards outside or decrease your contributions. So inequity is a cause of relationship decline. Or, sometimes you just have personal reflection. And this is sort of like changes in evaluative standards, but just putting things in perspective and just realizing that the relationship just isn't worth it anymore. Maybe there's too many costs and not enough rewards. Maybe you just feel like you need some time to yourself, to rebuild yourself. The loss of autonomy has gotten to you so much that you just really want to have some autonomy again. So all of these could be reasons why you might start thinking about initiating dissolution. Now what we have here, and I didn't label it, but it's Duck's dissolution model. And Steve Duck was my advisor in graduate school, so he's a cool guy. He wears 2 watches and a fishing vest all the time. Interesting guy. He's British. Anyways, so here's how it starts. So first, you have this is the breakdown itself. So first, you start to have intrapsychic processes. So this is where you start thinking about it, and you start having thoughts and cognitions about breaking up. So this is where you are internally debating the breakup. You haven't told anyone yet, but you're just starting to weigh the rewards and costs. You're starting to think about, is this worth it or not? That kind of thing. So these are your initial thoughts, and these thoughts are kind of leaning towards, ending the relationship. So then you have the dyadic process, and this is where you talk to your partner about it. And maybe in the dyadic process, you tell your partner, I'm not really happy about this, this, and this. And maybe you and your partner actually come to some kind of agreement that, hey, maybe I just need to be better about X, Y, and Z. Okay, let's stay together and let's work on these things. Okay, great. But sometimes you decide, actually, I just want to end the relationship. So you end it with the partner. So then you move on to the social process. And this is where you go to social networks. So here's the thing. No relationship exists in a vacuum. It exists in the context of a social network. You and your partner have friends who know that you all are together and who you formed an identity around. And so you have to let all your friends and family and everybody who knows you know that, hey, me and Sarah aren't together anymore. So you go through a social process where you have to tell all your social networks exactly what happened with your relationship. Now, sometimes it doesn't always go in this order. Sometimes you might have thoughts and you go to your social network first. Maybe you go to your best friend and you say, hey, I'm thinking about breaking up with John, blah, blah, blah. And then your best friend says, yeah, break up with John. Okay, so then you go to dyadic process. So there's a lot of ways where this can sometimes go out of order. But in any case, whatever order you do this process in, you then go into grave dressing, the grave dressing process. And this is where you create a story of why the relationship died. And you sort of erect, as Steve Duck would say, you erect a metaphorical tombstone, is what he would call it, that summarizes the relationship's main events and features from its birth to its death. So essentially in grave dressing, you come up with a story of your relationship. So when people ask you, what happened to you and Jake? You're like, well, Jake and I dated for 1.5 years, but Jake cheated on me, that idiot. And then, okay, so there's your grave dressing. Jake and I had a great relationship, but Jake cheated on me. He's an idiot. Okay, so there you go. That's your grave dressing. Jake is remembered as an idiot and the guy who cheated on you. But maybe the story was more complicated. Maybe there was a lot of fights between you and Jake, and maybe one time Jake got jealous because you were talking to some dude or some girl or whatever, and then Jake was like, well, then I'm going to cheat. And then, so actually you might have had a bigger role in the dissolution, but you just want to put it all on Jake. But that's your story. That's the story that you're telling everybody. That's the grave dressing that you're putting on it. Now, Jake might have a different story. Jake might have a different way of grave dressing, where Jake's going to be like, well, my partner was always nagging me and always flirting with everybody, so I got mad one day and cheated, or something. However you want to put that. And then you go through this other phase. And so this often gets left out in relationship dissolution literature. And this is called the resurrection phase. And the resurrection phase is the phase where you prepare yourself for new relationships after ending an old one. So the resurrection phase is sort of like that phase where you get to figure out who you are, because now you're back to being autonomous. Because remember, when you're in a relationship, there's a lot of togetherness, and you have to think of yourself as an item, and you have to think of yourself as being with a partner. Here, you're back to being autonomous, and so you start rethinking about who you are, what you're into. You might adjust your relationship standards so that, okay, now that I've dated Jake the idiot, I'm going to make sure in the future I don't date idiots, something like that or whatever. So you start rethinking your standards. You start thinking about who you are again. You start investing in yourself. Maybe you start going to the gym again. Maybe you start getting into fitness. Maybe you take up martial arts to rebuild your confidence. So here's the idea. People who are serial monogamists, so we've heard of this before, who basically go from relationship to relationship, they break up with somebody, they grave dress, and then they immediately go find a new relationship somewhere. They don't give themselves time to resurrect, you see? And so it's not necessarily good for them psychologically, because they're not figuring out who they are as an individual, and they're constantly stuck on being with someone that they don't know how to be alone. So it's really important that you, at the end of a relationship, whether you initiate it or you're the receiver of it, that you give yourself some time to resurrect. This is also known, so if you've noticed, after somebody gets out of a relationship, they're also more vulnerable for being taken advantage of. So the rebound period, it's kind of like you need a rebound period where you're not actually dating other people or doing those kinds of things, but you need a rebound period for yourself psychologically. But then, of course, you've heard of people taking advantage of people as a rebound. So this is what it's all referring to is resurrection and not letting the person fully resurrect. So go ahead and quiz yourself really fast here and go through these scenarios and see if you can recall which stage of the dissolution model applies here. So go ahead and pause the video, quiz yourself, make sure you understand this stuff. Okay, so Dave begins to consider alternative of having Laura as his girlfriend. So this would be intrapsychic, okay, because he's thinking about it individually within himself. Dave tells Laura that the relationship is over due to her lack of effort, okay, so that's going to be dyadic because he's talking to the partner directly. Dave seeks support from his friends about his decision to end the relationship with Laura. That's going to be the social phase because he's going to his outside network, so this is people outside of the relationship. Dave takes a break from dating to figure out what he wants in his next partner. That's going to be resurrection because he's focusing on himself and post-relationship, exactly what he's going to do next. And then Dave prepares a story explanation of why he broke up with Laura to his friends and family. That's going to be the grave dressing phase. So this is where he comes up with the story, the what happened to Laura. Okay, and then this is how he explains what happened to Laura. Got it? Now, if you recall this from a previous lecture, we have the staircase model of relationship development and dissolution. You can see here that this is another model of dissolution. And this is based on, so the staircase model is based on similarity, right? Similarity and self-disclosure, essentially. And then this is all about differentiation and less disclosure, right? And less communication. So differentiating is sort of like something you do intrapsychically. And you can also do it dyadically too. And then you can see how we can avoid and then terminate and all these things. So this is another way to look at relationship dissolution. And of course, you can always move back steps or move down steps or move sideways. So this is another way to think about relationship dissolution as well. Now, another thing about relationship dissolution is we have two ways of ending a relationship, actually. And one way is indirect, and then one set of ways is indirect, and then one set of ways is direct. So let's talk about the indirect ways that we end relationships. And this can definitely apply not just to romantic, but also to friendships and so forth. I always want to remind you of that. So number one is just simply decreasing disclosure is one way. So this is sort of like withdrawing from the relationship, and then eventually the partner just gets the hint. So maybe you met somebody and you just maybe talk to them once, and then you're just like, I don't really like this person. So you just decrease the amount of information that you tell them. You don't topicalize anything. You just kind of topic curtail, essentially, everything. And then the partner realizes it's impossible to make a conversation with this person because this person doesn't say anything. So then they just get the hint. So you basically limit topics, you limit disclosure, and it's really hard to have a conversation when nobody topicalizes and you topic curtail left and right. It's not fun to be in a conversation with someone like that. So then you just naturally go away. Decreasing availability is another one. So let's say you have a friend and maybe they like you more than you like them, and they're always asking you to hang out, and you're just like, no, I have this, no, I have that. Just after a while, your friend gives up because you're like never available. Okay, so you just decrease your availability. You decrease contact. So maybe you quit going to the gym because you always see a person there, or you just quit doing X, Y, and Z where you always see that person, and then you just don't talk to them anymore. Another way, though, maybe some of you have done this, cost escalation. So how does this work? Well, what happens is maybe you don't want to be the one to end the relationship, like you'd rather just let them end the relationship. So what you do is you start becoming more costly to the person. So you make the role more costly and undesirable to where your partner no longer wants to have this role. So maybe you start becoming really high maintenance, or you start becoming really naggy, or you start just being a pain in hopes that your partner will just break up with you, and then you don't have to have the guilt of like, I broke up with that person. No, they broke up with me, and then you're like, okay, that's fine. So by making the relationship more costly or engaging in behaviors that would want to cause the partner to break up to initiate the breakup first, becoming hostile. Some people, the way they cause romantic relationships to end is they cheat on purpose with the intent of their partner finding out, so then their partner will break up with them. Okay, so that is another way of doing cost escalation. And then, at the time when I was doing my dissertation, I had proposed doing a study on people who just randomly disappear in relationships without ever giving any kind of breakup story. Now, this was back in 2013, 2012, and we didn't have a term for it yet. We now call it ghosting. So my dissertation committee did not believe me, though, that this was a real thing. Like I was telling them, I swear, people just disappear sometimes, and they just cut off all contact, and they give you no explanation as to why they ended the relationship. And my committee was just like, there's no way that happens. People, that's got to be so rare, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's real. And then, so I couldn't do my dissertation on it. And then here we are in 2019, and yeah, ghosting is a thing. So we all know what this is, and it is an indirect way of ending the relationship. See, if we would have had a term for it, then I would have totally been able to do my dissertation on this, but because it didn't have a term, if you can name it, you can control it, and if you can name it, you can study it, and we just didn't have a name for it at the time. Now, that's indirect dissolution strategies that we just looked at. Now, the direct ones, there's only really two that can happen. So there's fait accompli. I know it doesn't look like that's how you pronounce it, but that's how you pronounce it. So fait accompli basically means just doing it on your own terms and letting the partner know it's over without any sort of hint or anything. Like it just kind of, the news just gets dropped on you just out of the blue. So fait accompli, I think literally means out of the blue. You just, on your own term, one-sided, I'm ending the relationship, see ya. Okay? So one-sided breakup. The other, and we just call a state of the relationship talk. Some people just call it the talk. We got to have the talk. Okay? We have the talk to become official, and then we have the talk to become unofficial. So this is inviting a conversation to talk about the relationship, about how both parties feel, and it's usually invites a two-sided sort of situation where you come to an agreement to end the relationship. Okay? So one-sided versus two-sided. Now, when people talk about ending the relationship, there's all kinds of rhetorical and persuasive reasons people try to give to end a relationship. And so we have studies that look at how people do these. And so these are some of the findings. So some people, when they break up, they'll make the argument that we got to test the relationship. So what does that mean? Asking to date other people to try out some kind of new configuration for a while. So maybe what people will do when they break up is they'll say, let's try dating other people first. Let's make sure that this is right. Or let's try just being friends for a while. And let's just take a break, and then date other people. And then maybe if it works out in 3 months, we'll come back. Okay, so testing the relationships. Some people appeal to independence. What that means is you want to have some freedom. As much as I like you, I really want to have some freedom while I start college. I don't want to be tied down, to one person. I want to explore my first year of college and have freedom and do all those wonderful things. So you're basically saying, I like you, but I want freedom more. Thirdly, some people promise friendship. So you ask to demote the relationship to friendship and to just keep in that mode. I think we should just be friends. I like you and all, but I think you're just better off as a friend, blah, blah, blah. And so you promise friendship. So I'm not completely leaving your life, but it just won't be in the capacity that would be romantic in nature. Then some people, if you're religious and stuff, or really spiritual, fatalism, claiming that God or some greater force, doesn't want the relationship or says that this relationship won't work. So it can be God, it can be, the universe, it could be something else, it could be circumstances or fate. I just don't feel like this greater force wants us to be together. Okay? Then you can appeal to happiness. So here, what people try to do is they'll say, you'll be happier without me. So you try to appeal to their happiness and say, I don't really do much. You deserve better than me. You'll be happier without me. And so try to appeal to happiness of the target. Or fairness. It's not fair to you that I'm not 100% invested. You deserve better. Or it's not fair to me that blah blah blah. I deserve better. So you kind of bust out equity, and maybe you kind of go, instead of saying I'm not receiving enough, you can say I'm not giving enough, and it's not fair to you. So playing on your side of equity on the equation, playing on your side of the equity equation. Then of course there's just straight up appealing to faults. So pointing out things that the partner did wrong and just kind of making them feel bad, like you're a bad partner because you didn't do this and you didn't do that, that kind of thing. Usually doesn't sound pleasant, not a pleasant way to end. And then identity management is another one. So what is identity management? Well, blaming something on yourself or saying that it's not you, it's me, basically. So that's your classic, worked in the 90s and 80s, it's not you, it's me, that kind of thing. So somehow taking the fault for the relationship being what it is and not making it about the other person. So there was a study that looked at the trajectory of these conversations, and hopefully you can read this, but it starts here, and you can see where you decide to end the relationship, and then is the exit goal reciprocal? So that means both parties want to end the relationship, and then are the parties direct? If so, okay, so they have some kind of negotiated farewell or attributional conflict. If they're not direct, then they fade away or de-escalate. So that means basically they just kind of stop talking and the relationship just fades without anyone formally breaking up. Because that can happen. A lot of times relationships just fade. Maybe you and your partner mutually just kind of give each other hints, and then no one ever officially does state of the relationship talk or fait accompli. They just you just stop talking mutually. So that can happen. So that's sometimes how relationships dissolve, is because you don't have that regular communication. I don't know, I haven't talked to Jan in 2 months. So it's safe to say that you're probably not together then if you haven't talked in 2 months, unless Jan's in Papua New Guinea, studying abroad. I don't know why you'd stop. You could study abroad in Papua New Guinea. There's stuff there. Okay, so, so fading away, things like that. So you can pause the video, and so basically it's like a decision tree, sort of. It's kind of like, if this, then that. Let me go ahead and erase everything so you're not, your vision isn't blocked. And you can kind of see how relationship talk can go in different trajectories. So if you're thinking about breaking up with somebody, you can play out all the possibilities here and then figure out what's the best way to break up with someone. So not that I'm encouraging dissolution unless you're really unhappy, okay, and the person's not a good person. Okay, don't break up with good people, break up with bad people. So in conclusion, and I believe this is the last lecture of this online class, number 1, communication is the lifeblood of relationships. I think what you can see through all of these lectures and all this entire course is that communication is key to relationships. Not just that you communicate, but how you communicate exactly. And do you respect face? And do you show gratitude to your partner? Do you, keep your secrets? Do you keep your partner certain? All of those things. You got to make sure that you're communicating well and you're communicating with respect. Secondly, certainty is important. So keep your partner certain. If there's one piece of advice I can give you, keep your partner certain. And then thirdly, there's always direct and indirect ways of doing things, okay? Direct versus indirect. So with breaking up, there's ways where people can give hints. So pay attention to hints. Don't be so literal. Don't be so have things in your face. Things have to be said directly to you. A lot of communication is done indirectly. A lot of it's done through cues. A lot of it's done through hints and indirect requests and such. We didn't get to go into a lot of depth on indirect speech acts and whatnot. But that's something I would always say. Pay attention to cues. Pay attention to nonverbals. Okay? Nonverbals always say a lot. But I text. Okay, so maybe you shouldn't text so much. And maybe try to talk to people face to face and those kinds of things. Okay? Diversify your communication. So that means, so text, Snap, and Instagram. Yeah, okay, maybe that. But also face to face and also phone. So read your partner's nonverbals. Okay? Be responsive. Pay attention. Okay? So that's it for this lecture, and we'll see you later.